Hello, good morning. This is Dr. Iftikhar Ansari from Department of Political Science, Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh. Today I'll be talking about the concept of minimal state, that is the liberal state with its minimal function, which is being promoted by one of the theories of liberalism, individualism in the early part of the development of the state, that is the liberal state. And I'll be talking about its activities, the sphere of activities and its nature. So here we start. So during 16th century, the struggle which the rising middle classes, especially the bourgeois class, waged against feudalism, that is the church and monarchy, it gave birth to liberal theory in politics and liberal traditions in political philosophy. So whenever a new class emerges in society, together with it emerges the social, economic, political, moral, cultural, and psychological ideology. So with the emergence of this new bourgeois class in the 16th century, the philosophy of liberalism also came into being. Now, liberalism was developed and interpreted by philosophers of rising bourgeois class with increase in the strength of this working class in the form of capitalist, the bourgeois class. Liberalism also went on changing and developing and evolving later on. So every theory as it happens goes on changing with change in the class and position of economic class whose interest it represents. Now this has happened with liberalism as well. It has also changed, and the question is why it is quite difficult to give its concrete definition, like what changes it has brought about and what is the definition of liberalism itself. Professor Lasky says it's not easy to describe, much less to define. For it, that is, the liberalism, is hardly less a habit of mind than a body of doctrine. So Lasky, however, has associated liberalism with the rise of bourgeois class and the private property. He writes, the ideas of liberalism, in short, is historically connected with the ownership of private property. So the concept of liberalism in the early phase, the classical liberalism as it is called, emerged as an economic, social and political theory to serve the economic interest and other needs of the rising class, that was this bourgeois class. So the basis of liberalism in the early phase was individual, not of that world of a spiritual being, but of this world, that the propertyless, poor and downtrodden, not that, but the capitalist, or the one as Macpherson described as possessive individual. So the slogan of liberalism has been secularism, limited state, individualism, liberty, equality, fraternity, rights and justice. But all these slogans are in one way or the other associated with the freedom of private property. So the political basis of liberalism is limited and liberal democratic governments. Now, state in which representative government would hold power in the form of people's trust. So the basis of political power is consent of the people. In actual practice, this means that power is vested in the bourgeoisie class. However, only this class and its representatives are managed to acquire skill of public approval on their authority. So according to this liberal theory, the state is not something which has been made or gifted by God to the people, or which has originated because of any kind of force, or it has come into existence because of any kind of contract. It maintains the state is a man-made institution which is created by individuals through a free social contract or to safeguard their interest, rights and property. So the minimal state that we are going to talk about here, the negative liberalism as it is called, it has gone a change with the change in circumstances and the relative position of the classes. Now theories also change accordingly. So the notion of state sovereignty and the function of state change with the change in the condition and requirement of the classes, with those who are supporting this theory. So during the 17th century, the requirement of the capitalist classes which supported this liberalism were quite different from during the 18th, 19th and 20th century. The requirement of this class changed, thereby necessitating a different role in the state in society. So negative liberalism of 18th and early 19th century, which supported the negative state with minimal functions, changed to positive liberalism in the later half of 19th and early half of 20th century. We'll talk about that concept later on in some other video. Now, this concept that we are talking about, the minimal liberalized state, it supported the negative state. So, negative liberalism assigned only negative or police functions, resolving conflict, maintaining law and order, or regulating free competition to the state, and adopted the principle of laissez-faire, that is non-interference in the economic affair. So the state was regarded as the police state, whereas positive liberalism later on, as it came up in 20th century or 19th century, was assigned a positive and welfare functions, that is economic, social, cultural and political function to the state. Thus, liberal views underwent a change, and because of this, we find two different kind of liberalism we'll be discussing. So today, we are talking about the negative, not the positive liberalism. So main point of liberal theory, if we summarize it or talk concisely before we move deeper into it, it is the philosophy of the rising bourgeois class during the 16th and 17th century. It was a progressive revolt against the reactionary forces presented by feudalism, church and monarchy. And it was a voice for the recognition of the consent of the individual as the basis of society and the state, and is based on individuals' rights and liberty. Now, its concept of individual is that of possessive individual. So, it was a political movement for the establishment of democratic government. Now, if you talk about the features of the negative liberalism, that is the minimal state, it says that negative liberalism, which is also known as theory of laissez-faire, as a police state, or the theory of individualism. Now, according to this, state is a necessary evil, necessary because selfish and egoistic nature of man. State maintains law and order in society. It removes the uncertainties and ambiguities in society. It's an evil because it's an enemy of individual liberty. The state and individual freedom are seen as opposite, and negative liberalism wants to give more and more freedom to the individual by increasing the sphere of his activities and decreasing the sphere of the state. The function of the state is to provide physical security to the individual, and the individuals can develop his personality without any interference of the state. Now, this theory supports the view that the individual should be left alone by the state to develop his own personality in his own way. The main function of the state are negative, that is to check violence or check disruptions, disorder or fraud. In brief, it means that functions of the state should be bare minimum so that the liberty of the individual may be maximized. Now, the liberal theory of negative function of the state was supported by the rising capitalist class during the 18th century. At the time, the state was hindering the free development of capitalism. The freedom of merchants and industrialists from the control of the state was necessary for the free development of trade, commerce and industries. Now, during the period of Industrial Revolution from 1760 to 1830 in England and Europe, the control of the state over the trade and industries was regarded as unnecessary. It was considered anti-development and retarding in its nature, and as such, it was considered an interference of the state in the economic matters, which was opposed vehemently. So, reduction in the sphere of activity of the state was demanded by the rising capitalist class so that the capitalist economy may blossom. It was held that the economic system of the society will function well through free competition and exchange. So, negative liberalism or minimal state, the concept was thus the political requirement of a competitive market, a society of the 18th century. So, negative liberalism assumed that the production system would run smoothly on the basis of market mechanism of demand and supply, and the economic system had a capacity to move towards equilibrium by itself. So, the economic system could have a natural equilibrium, then state interference in the economy was almost unnecessary. And negative liberalism was supported by thinkers like Adam Smith on economic basis, by Bentham on moral and political basis. So Adam Smith and his supporters, who were also known as classical economists, and Bentham and his supporters are known as philosophical radicals, they came up with their own ideas on the minimal state. And to go deeper into what they meant by their concept of state as minimal state, we take the view of Adam Smith and then Bentham to see what they have to propose and propound. So Adam Smith from 1723 to 1790 is regarded as the father of modern economics. His view on economic liberalism are quite clear. Adam Smith was developing his economic and political theories during the heydays of Industrial Revolution, and he was the philosopher of emerging capitalism. So he closely analyzed the transition from feudalism to capitalism and established the superiority of capitalist economy over feudal economy. Now he tried to establish that capitalism is a logical, progressive, and capitalist economy can run without any external checks by state or any such power. He strongly objected to the state's interference in the economic affairs of society. His main ideas are given in his famous book, The Wealth of Nations, which he wrote in 1776. And after Adam Smith, we found Ricardo from 1772 to 1823 and Malthus, who supported his view in their theories of rent and population. So the main tenet of Adam Smith about the state and its function is that the state should not interfere in the economic affairs of society. The state can neither control nor should it control the economic affairs of society at large. The views of Adam Smith and other negative liberals have been summarized by Bullock, who says that the request which agriculture, manufacturers and commerce present to government is as modest and reasonable as that which Diogenes made to Alexander, that is, stand out my sunshine. The functions assigned to the state are merely the maintenance of law and order and justice. Economic affairs can be left under the command of the economic law, such as demand, supply, competition, rule of market economy. All the economic affairs of the free society can be settled by free competition and free exchange. The only duty assigned to state was to see that there is a fair play in economic transactions, economic activities, there is a fair dealing in give and take, and contracts are observed without any default. So the function of state, Adam Smith pleaded, should be like those of the referee in a football match or umpire in a cricket match, who do not play but only see that players are playing fairly according to the rules of the game. Thus, the role of the state in economic affairs should be on par with the role of an umpire in a cricket match. That is, the state should have the negative role of controlling and checking. In this way, Smith supported a negative state or police state with the minimum possible functions. Adam Smith maintained that economic and political affairs of society are two different and distinct spheres. He was the forceful advocate of the emerging capitalist class in the 18th century and presented their mistrust of state and state power. Thus, he was a champion of liberalism, of free market, which called for the liberation of businessmen from the restrictive regulations which government imposed on economic activity. Now, his main idea is that the desire for personal profit within the framework of a competitive economic system that guides the system towards the greatest welfare of all. So the view of Adam Smith are based on three presuppositions, and the first is that by mutual exchange of equilibrium among various interests would automatically be achieved. The second is that all the economic interests in society have an equal bargaining and competitive power. And third is that the division of social property on the basis of rent, profit, and wages is logical and is the best possible arrangement. But all these three presuppositions proved wrong later on, as all the interests in society can never have any equilibrium by free exchange, because the bargaining capacities of all the economic interests is not equal. So all the economic interests do not possess an equal competing power, as some interests are weak and others are strong. An economic interest is a class interest, and classes in society are never equal in competing and bargaining power. Furthermore, the division of social property on the basis of rent, power, and wages is neither logical, it's not justified, Now, by this division of social property, there will be extreme inequality in society and no social unity of any kind would be possible. It will lead to sharp class struggle, which will tear society into pieces. Capitalists, for their profit, would like to give less wages to the workers, and workers, in order to satisfy their daily needs, will demand more wages, and thus their classes and their interest will be completely antagonistic, opposed to each other. So Adam Smith, being the philosopher of emerging capitalism, he failed to take note of these difficulties which are bound to emerge in a free society having free economy. Now, his faith in the mechanism of capitalist economy and mistrust of the state that led him to declare that state should have a minimum functions necessary for upholding the legal basis of capitalist social relations, maintaining stable currency, managing defense and external relations. Now, these views support the minimal state or the negative state, which was the requirement of, at the time of emerging capitalism in the 18th century. These views should not stand their growth in the later half in the 19th century. Now, with that, we come to the another thinker, or the philosopher, who was whose views were responsible for the foundation of minimal state in the early 17th century. Here it's the Bentham, Gemini Bentham, whose views from 1748 to 1832, we are going to diagnose and see what he has to say about the minimal state. So Bentham was no doubt a great social reformer, jurist and political thinker of England, and his views enormously influenced political philosophy during the 19th century. And as a political theorist, he is the father of modern utilitarianism. Though ideas concerning utilitarianism can even be found in writings of Greek philosophers, that is Epicurus, and also in the writings of David Hume and Priestley, the credit for establishing it as a philosophy goes mainly to Jeremy Bentham. He is known as the father of philosophic radicalism. Now, the view of Bentham are based on hedonism. It means that all men seek pleasure and want to avoid pain. The work which gave pleasure are proper, have utility, and the works which gave pain are improper and do not have utility. So pleasure and pain are the measure of each and everything or every activity. So Bentham writes, nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. It is for them alone to point out what we ought to do as well as to determine what we shall do. Thus, for Bentham, the measure of utility of anything can be its capacity to cause pleasure or pain. Only if it causes pleasure does it have utility, otherwise not. Everything which adds to pleasure of an individual, irrespective of quality of pleasure, is good, and painful things are bad. So pleasure can be had by many means, like the sanctions he gave on pleasure, that is religion, morality, material things. So pleasure has only quantity and no qualitative effect or measurement. So pleasure derived from playing a child's game and reading philosophy and literature, according to him, is almost similar. So on this basis, he gave the theory of hedonistic calculus or philosophic calculus, and Bentham developed in the principle of artificial identification of interest of the individual. So for Bentham, law, politics and state have a social utility, and because of this alone, they are justified. The state has originated because of its social unity and not because of any social contract, and the basis, object and function of the state and the sphere of activity should be ascertained on the basis of its social utility. So the object of the state is the greatest happiness of the greatest number. So the function of the state should also be based on this very principle. So if we see the implication of what his philosophy holds in political sphere, we find that he maintains that the functions of the state should be minimum, because each individual can manage his affairs in a better way by himself, as he is the best judge of his interests. The state and society are for individuals, and the state should not do those things which may cause pain to individuals. The community is fictitious body, he says, composed of individual persons, and the interest of the community then is what? I mean, there is no community interest. It's an individual interest which should be added up. So the sum of the interest of the several members who compose a community, that should be a community interest, but he says it doesn't hold any worth against individual interest. So it is the vain talk of the interest of the community without understanding what is the interest of the individual. As the basis of state is unity and its utility, the justification of state itself is its capacity to increase the happiness of individuals. Now, Bentham says the business of government is to promote the happiness of the society, and thus, according to Bentham, the state is neither a high ethical idea nor a product of any social contract, but it's merely an institution to serve the interests of the individuals. Explaining his views, Professor Sabine says the basis of government is not contract but human need, and the satisfaction of human need is its sole justification. Explaining the views of Bentham, Max says that rulers should be granted the power to do good, and deprived of the power to do evil. Like Adam Smith and Ricardo, Bentham believed in the dogma of self-regulating an uncontrolled economy in which the state has virtually no role to play. So utilitarians, they were emphatically talking about laissez-faire, non-interference. It demanded free trade, freedom of occupation, unrestricted competition, inviolable property rights, and other individualistic reforms. So he maintained that the state should have a minimum function and the individual should be left alone as much as possible to live a life of happiness and enjoy his life in his own way. The individual is the end of the state and society, and laws of the state are obeyed by men because they find it useful to obey the laws rather than disobey it. So the minimal state, or the negative liberalism that was supported by Adam Smith on economic basis and Bentham on political and moral basis, it was supported by various other thinkers during the 18th, 19th and 20th centuries on certain other grounds. Now, during the 18th and 19th century, we find Thomas Paine, Robert Spencer, and William Senior also supported the idea that the function of state should be bare minimum. And William Senior says the essential business of the government is to afford defense, to protect the community against foreign or domestic fraud. Unfortunately, however, the governments have generally supposed it to be their duty not merely to give security, but wealth, not merely to establish or enable their subjects to produce and enjoy safety, but to teach them what to produce and how to produce. Thomas Paine supported the idea of natural rights of man and maintained that the state should have a limited scope and sphere of functions. He said, while society in any state is a blessing, and government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil. In its worst state, he says, state is intolerable. Herbert Spencer, following the principle of social Darwinism, maintained that the function of the state should be bare minimum and society should be governed by the principle of survival of the fittest. Only fit persons have a right to survive. For the health of the society, it would be really beneficial if weak persons are not given any assistance and allowed to perish. So according to Spencer, the state and its sphere of activity should not be to help the weak, the poor and the handicapped, and they should be allowed to die a natural death because the weak or the unfit should have no right to be among the fittest. So on the basis of Spencer, and on this very basis, he recommended free competition among the members of the society, suggested that the state should have a minimum role in a social economic sphere, and according to Spencer, state should not and cannot perform welfare functions and must not give assistance to weaker sections. So he supported only three functions of the state, and that was the protection of individual against external enemies, protection of individual against internal enemies, and the enforcement of contracts lawfully made. However, Spencer's analysis revealed inhuman tendencies inherent in the individualistic arguments, and liberalism cannot digest this very frank statement. So in brief, some of the main points of the minimal state that we have discussed and its nature that we are talking about is this, that the state is a human institution, and it's created by man for its own benefit, and the end of the state are to maintain a law and order, discipline and peace, and rights, liberties, life and property of the individual cannot be safe without the laws and sovereign power of the state. So it's a necessary evil, and the state is made by the people, and its basis is democratic. And there is a difference between the state and society, the state and the government, and the sphere and the government and its sovereignty is limited by the individual's rights and the liberties. So liberalism refuses to accept that state and sovereignty belong to any particular class. It is an instrument of exploitation. It does not give any right to revolution to any particular class of people. So liberalism does not believe in the withering away of the state or in a stateless society as later on propounded by Marxism. So all in all, it's a necessity, but the necessity is the evil one. Further on, they say there is a difference between the state and society and the state and government, as they both are the one, especially the government that represents the state, and society is prior to state. State has come to provide security to the people living in society. And the sphere of society of the state and the state is limited. So liberalism refuses to accept that there can be any kind of a class, as we have already talked about. And Marxism says there are classes which are benefited by this concept of state and others which are deprived, and the other class, it has a right to revolt against such a system and form a stateless society kind of a thing. So that has already been refuted by our previous argument. So all in all, what we find in the end is that the concept of minimal state is the negative liberalism or negative state, and negative in the sense it restricts the state activity to a bare minimum, that is providing only protection, whether internal or external, and like a referee regulating the free market or free economy, and it has no at all role in economic affairs, should not make or regulate the economic activities, let it be guided, and various mechanisms should evolve on the basis of its demand and supply, the two factors controlling the economy. And in political sphere, it should only work as a referee regulating those activities in economic sphere and political sphere, and also enforcing the contract which are illegally made by the people or the players who are playing in that economic sphere. Okay, with that we come to the end of my lecture on. With that, I come to the end of my lecture on minimal state. And thanks for listening, and thanks for watching. Thank you.